ॐ सहना भवतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। हरि ओम। Readings from Meditation and Spiritual Life, Chapter 4. Our next point is personal and impersonal aspects of the divine. As Sri Krishna has put it in the Bhagavad Gita, greater is the difficulty of those whose minds are set on the impersonal. For the heights of the Absolute are very hard for embodied beings to reach. Hence, the worship of and the meditation on the impersonal through the personal aspects and symbols has been most popular in Hinduism in almost all forms of spiritual practice. The aspirant looks upon the divine as a personal being endowed with superhuman attributes who responds to his prayers and worship and helps him in attaining perfection and bliss. Some of the Upanishads contain references to this view of reality. Sheta Upanishad says, "Desirous of emancipation, I seek refuge in that effulgent being, whose light reveals the knowledge of the Atman, who first created the cosmic soul, that is Hiranyagarbha, and delivered to him the supreme knowledge, who is without parts, without actions, tranquil, without fault, without taint, who is the supreme bridge to immortality and is self-effulgent like a blazing fire consuming its fuel." Even in the concept of a personal God itself, there is the distinction between anthropomorphic and non-anthropomorphic aspects. In Islam, God is personal but not anthropomorphic. That is, God does not have a human form. The God of Islam and Judaism has been described by an eminent writer as anthropopsychic, that is, possessed of human feelings and thoughts, but not human form. In Hinduism, both anthropomorphic and non-anthropomorphic concepts are found. In popular Hinduism, worship of various deities is practiced. This does not, however, mean that Hinduism is polytheistic. Regarding theistic doctrine, Hinduism is as monotheistic as any other religion, but with this difference: whereas in other religions only one God has been exalted to the status of the supreme God, for example, Yahweh in Judaism, in Hinduism various gods have been elevated to this rank by their followers. The worshipper of Vishnu thinks that Narayana is the supreme deity and all the other gods are subordinate to him. The worshipper of Shiva thinks that Shiva is the supreme god and all the other gods are minor ones. Such a concept has been called henotheism by Max Muller. This has enabled Hinduism to integrate diverse thought currents and religious ideals in its fold. The idea of one supreme God who is exalted about all gods has been an abiding fact in the religious consciousness of the Hindu. But so far as the names of gods are concerned, there has taken place a great revolution, as we have already pointed out. Names like Vishnu and Shiva, that were of minor importance during Vedic period, came to be very prominent in later times, while those like Indra, Mitra, and Varuna have been practically forgotten. Besides, the worship of incarnations like Rama and Krishna has come to prevail everywhere, and it has been recognized more and more that the formless or the impersonal is the background of all the divine personalities, which are the manifestations of the immutable, unmanifested principle. There are sectarians who might speak of the superiority of their particular gods, incarnations, and prophets, but sheer having the totality of vision, have regarded all personalities, either of gods or godmen, to be diverse expressions of the impersonal. Just as an ocean gives rise to innumerable waves, but continues to be infinite and unfathomable as ever, so also the ultimate reality remains immutable, even though giving rise to various gods. Indeed, men of the highest spiritual illumination have realized that whatever may be the holy personality one may begin with, the goal of spiritual life lies in the experience of the impersonal, the one without a second, in which the worshipper and the worshipped, nay, God, souls, and the universe get merged and become one and individual. Our next point is from gods to the Godhead. The impersonal is beyond the reach of the devotee, while the personal does not satisfy his philosophic sense. Hence, the worship of the personal impersonal has been most popular in all higher forms of spiritual practice. And this is true of the worshippers of Krishna or Rama, Shiva or Vishnu, Durga or Kali. The worship of the divine personality or the incarnated principle has certainly an unquestionable place in spiritual life. It is indispensable for most devotees, as Sri Krishna has declared in the Bhagavad Gita. The path of the Absolute and the unmanifest is very hard to follow. Hence, we find that in many religious faiths, the devotee worships the Lord, the divine person, resigning all his actions to him, meditating on him with devotion and concentration, and regarding him as the supreme goal of life. But the true devotee does not stop with worshipping the anthropomorphic form of the Lord. He gradually learns to look upon the divine form that he worships as an embodiment of the attributes that reveals the supreme principle in some way or other. He further learns to look upon the divine form as a divine symbol or a divine idea, and this idea again becomes a symbol of the reality that is at the back of everything. Shiva is one of the gods of popular Hinduism. The gross minded worshipper may take him to be the god of destruction, dwelling in the lonely mountains or in the cremation ground. But to the evolved devotee, he is the embodiment of renunciation and the destroyer of all evil. He is besides the personification of contemplation and divine consciousness. The advanced worshipper sings his glory thus: O Lord, thou art Brahman, the one without a second. Thou art everything. Thou art the one truth, and verily there is nothing but thee. The material minded worshipper of Vishnu sees in him the god of protection and preservation, who, out of his infinite mercy, incarnates himself for the good of his devotees. But the devotee of the highest types sees in him the embodiment of the divine principle that permeates the entire universe, in whom is being enacted the world play with its creation, preservation, and dissolution. And he prays, Lord, thou abidest in all, thou art all, thou assumest all forms, thou art the origin of all, thou art the self of all. Salutations unto thee. Our next point is worship of God as the mother. Can we worship God as the mother? In India, we do not ask this question. We take it for granted that the divine spirit can be worshipped in many ways, not only as the master, the only mode allowed in Islam and Christianity, but also as the mother, as a divine child, or as the divine lover. There is nothing unnatural in worshipping God as the mother. Just as a baby is nursed and nourished by its mother, so also does God create, support, and nourish all living beings. To look upon God as the mother is the most natural way. It is also the most sublime and enduring attitude. There is greater freedom and spontaneity in the devotee's relationship with God as the mother. As Sri Ramakrishna used to say, just as a child can force its demands on its mother, so can the devotee force his demand on God. He gives another illustration. As long as the child is playing with its toys, the mother busies herself with household chores. But when the child throws away the toys and cries out for its mother, the mother keeps down the cooking pot and runs to the child. This beautiful analogy illustrates the strong bond that exists between the divine concept as the mother and the devotee. The conception of God as the mother is not a Hindu creation. It prevailed in many countries in ancient times. Some of these mother cults were degenerate, but we are concerned with the ideal of mother worship. In Egypt, she was known as Isis, in Babylonia and Assyria as Ishtar, in Greece as Demeter, and in Phrygia as Cybele. When they were hard pressed by the great Carthaginian military general Hannibal, the Romans worshipped Cybele for success in the war and officially declared her to be the mother of gods. Judaism and later on Islam put an end to mother worship in the Middle East. Christianity too suppressed it, but later on revived it in a modified form. Catholics venerate Virgin Mary as Theotokos, the Mother of God. Because of theological strictures, the Blessed Virgin occupies an inferior position in the Church. But the popular masses do not make such distinctions. Millions of Catholics, especially the poor, worship Virgin Mary more or less in the same way as Hindus worship the Divine Mother. In Warsaw, I saw an ancient temple dedicated to the Madonna. In Switzerland, I visited a monastery which was over 1,000 years old. I saw their monks worshipping the Black Madonna. In her complexion and appearance, she reminded me of the Hindu deity Kali. The Gregorian chants and the crowds of pilgrims created the familiar atmosphere of a Devi temple in India. Veneration of the Mother of God is steadily gaining ground in Europe and in Latin America countries. When I was in Europe, I was at first baffled by the inability of Western people to regard God as the mother. One lady told me, "Well, Swami, I myself am a mother. I have my own mother still living. We have strong points and weak points, but we do not see any special sanctity about motherhood. We don't see any divinity in us." That was, of course, her misfortune. This reminds me of a story. One day, some children were found talking noisily. They were playing a new game about telling lies. The boy who told the biggest lie would get the first prize. Just then, a priest came that way and asked the boys what they were doing. When he was told about it, he advised the boys, "My children, you should not tell lies. When I was a boy of your age, I never told a lie." All the boys then shouted in unison, "Father, you get the first prize." Children know the ways of children, and women know the ways of women. But they see only the surface, the body, and its behavior, and are unable to see any divinity beyond it. In the West, a woman is looked upon as a sweetheart or wife. The mother does not command respect and love, as in a Hindu home. Since theologians teach that Eve was created out of the rib of Adam, woman is always considered inferior to man. This attitude has determined women's role in Western society. If men in the West worshipped God as the mother, they would be less hard-hearted and sex-conscious and be more spiritual. There would be stronger family bonds and greater domestic peace. In India, the worship of God as the mother has had an unbroken tradition right from the Vedic times. The Vedas contain a number of hymns addressed to Devi. In the Kena Upanishad, the mother appears as the embodiment of spiritual knowledge. In later centuries, rose a whole body of literature, that is Tantras, dedicated to the worship and philosophy of the Divine Mother. In Bengal, mother worship then attained great refinement and has since become a part and parcel of the daily life of the people. With the advent of Sri Ramakrishna, mother worship has undergone a rejuvenation. All that was dross has been washed away, and the mother shines in a new light in the homes and hearts of millions of people. What did Sri Ramakrishna mean by Mother Kali? He looked upon her as the creative power of the universe. Further, he said that she was inseparable from Brahman. The immutable reality is Brahman. When it manifests as the universe, it is Kali. Just as the blue color of the sky indicates vastness, the dark complexion of Kali indicates infinitude. Sri Ramakrishna thus elevates the worship of the image of Kali to the adoration of the infinite. The mother power or the divine energy has many forms and symbols. She is symbolized variously as the goddess of knowledge, as the goddess of wealth, and as the goddess of death, playing the dance of destruction. In the form of Kali, she is represented as the power of creation, protection, and destruction, and as the power in which all things rest after dissolution. She stands on the still, prostrate form of Shiva, the representation of the Absolute. This is symbolical of the entire cosmic process, with the transcendental reality as its basis. Reality is beyond both life and death, and as such, the devotee should neither cling to life nor be afraid of death. He should rise above both the pleasant and the terrible to the transcendental plane, from where he can say, "The shade of death and immortality, both these, O Mother, are thy grace supreme." And addressing her, the devotee says, "Thou hast neither name nor lineage, neither birth nor death, neither bondage nor freedom. Thou art the one without a second, known as the Brahman Supreme." Such is the highest conception of Mother in Hinduism. Our next point is the Hindu concept of incarnation. Unlike other religions, Hinduism believes in several incarnations of God. Each one is looked upon as an ideal for ordinary men to understand the mystery of the Godhead. A Hindu is free to accept any of these incarnations as his spiritual ideal through whom he tries to establish contact with the Absolute. The devotee does not see the human limitations, which the critical Western scholars are eager to point out, but only divinity and divine attributes in the incarnations. The humanity of the incarnations is utilized in establishing intimate personal relationships with them. The human side is only a symbol of the divine. Rama is one of the incarnations of Vishnu and is the embodiment of devotion to truth and duty. The ordinary worshipper stresses his lovely form and noble attributes, but the illumined devotee sees him immanent in all and prays, "Thou art the embodiment of the highest virtues. Thou art the indweller, the supreme being. Thou art the greatest refuge and savior of mankind. Thou art the stainless, changeless, indestructible, pure, and eternal wisdom and truth." The Krishna ideal in its various forms is very widespread but is also grossly misunderstood by many. Crude minded critics take his spot with the gopis in Vrindavan in a vulgar sense, but devotees like Sri Ramakrishna saw in him the highest ideal of divine love, which can be realized only by those who have become free from all traces of sensuality and crudeness. Realizing Sri Krishna's universal form manifest in all, Arjuna makes obeisance to him, saying, "Salutations to thee on every side, O Lord, thou art everything, infinite in power and infinite in prowess. Thou pervadest all, thou art all." Thus, the conception of the personal impersonal, of the one in the many, permits the entire Hindu religious consciousness, a fact that will be clearly understood by those who are able to enter into the true spirit of Hindu scriptures. Our next point is plea for religious toleration and harmony. But it is not given to all to realize this great ideal of synthesis and acceptance. Devotees with a strongly sectarian bias very often hold that salvation lies only through the worship of their particular deity or incarnation, or through devotion to their formless or personal God who delivers his message to mankind only through certain prophets or teachers. But side by side with men of circumscribed vision, there are liberal souls who, while they yield to none in their love and faith for their chosen ideal, look upon all divine personalities as manifestations of the same truth. I make no difference in substance between Shiva, the Supreme Lord of the universe, and Vishnu, its inmost self, but still may my devotion be directed to Shiva. A comparatively modern verse goes further and speaks of this underlying harmony in the clearest terms. Whether the highest being is called Vishnu or Shiva, Brahma or Indra, sun or moon, Buddha or the perfect Mahavir, I always offer my salutations to him alone, who is free from attachment and hatred, from worldliness and ignorance, who is endowed with purity and compassion, and is possessed of all noble attributes. Thus, the conception of unity behind diversity has been a fundamental fact in the Hindu religious consciousness all along its unbroken course, an idea that was very positively proclaimed by Manu. One ought to know the Supreme Spirit, who is the ruler of all, subtler than subtlest, of resplendent glory, and capable of being realized only by meditation. Some call him Agni, others call him Manu, and others Prajapati. Some again call him Indra, others Prana, and still others the eternal Brahman. Persons who cannot rise above the idea of multiplicity and limitations understand by the terms Agni, etc., only the different gods. But those who can take a higher view mean by them the different aspects or attributes of the same divine being. Truly speaking, there have been monotheistic and monistic interpreters who have always considered the various names to be different attributes of the one and the same God. And in this respect, the commentator of the Vishnu Sahasranama has little difference with the monotheistic interpreters of the modern Arya Samaj. Indeed, if the personal, whatever be its name or form, be it a god or an incarnation, be regarded as an expression of the impersonal, then in the common worship of this personal, impersonal, or the impersonal personal being, the followers of all religions and creeds may join their hands and hearts. And special stress should be laid in modern times on the recognition of this universal aspect of the divine being, so that it may serve as a great bond for uniting the truly religious minded in all lands and climes, and for making them work together for the common will in a spirit of brotherhood and fellowship, service and cooperation. Shvetasatora Upanishad says, "May he, the one without a second, who, though formless and without any purpose of his own, produces various forms by means of his manifold powers, from whom the universe comes into being in the beginning of creation, and to whom it returns in the end, endow us with good thoughts." Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat.